Mr. Wraxall set out on his homeward way. His mind was full of the thought of Count Magnus. He had no eyes for his surroundings, no perception of the evening scents of the woods or the evening light on the lake. And when all of a sudden he pulled up short, he was astonished to find himself already at the gate of the churchyard and within a few minutes of his dinner. His eyes fell on the mausoleum. "Ah," he said, "Count Magnus, there you are. I should dearly like to see you." Like many solitary men, he writes, I have a habit of talking to myself aloud. And unlike some of the Greek and Latin particles, I do not expect an answer. Certainly, and perhaps fortunately in this case, there was neither voice nor any that regarded. Only the woman who, I suppose, was cleaning up the church, dropped some metallic object on the floor, whose clang startled me. Count Magnus, I think, sleeps sound enough. That same evening, the landlord of the inn, who had heard Mr. Wraxall say that he wished to see the clerk, or deacon as he would be called in Sweden, of the parish, introduced him to that official at the inn parlour. A visit to the De la Gardie tomb house was soon arranged for the next day, and a little general conversation ensued. Mr. Wraxall, remembering that one function of Scandinavian deacons is to teach candidates for confirmation, thought he would refresh his memory on a biblical point. "Can you tell me," he said, "anything about Chorazin?" The deacon seemed startled, but readily reminded him how that village had once been denounced. "To be sure," said Mr. Wraxall, "it is, I suppose, quite a ruin now." "So I expect," replied the deacon. "I have heard some of our old priests say that Antichrist is to be born there, and there are tales." "Ah, what are those tales?" Mr. Wraxall put in. "Tales, I was going to say, which I have forgotten," said the deacon, and soon after that he said good night. The landlord was now alone and at Mr. Wraxall's mercy, and that inquirer was not inclined to spare him. "Herr Nielsen," he said, "I have found out something about the Black Pilgrimage. You may as well tell me what you know. What did the Count bring back with him?" Swedes are habitually slow, perhaps, in answering, or perhaps the landlord was the exception. I'm not sure. But Mr. Wraxall notes that the landlord spent at least 1 minute in looking at him before he said anything at all. Then he came up close to his guest, and with a good deal of effort he spoke. "Mr. Wraxall, I can tell you this one little tale, and no more, not any more. You must not ask anything else when I have done. In my grandfather's time, that is 92 years ago, there were 2 men who said, 'The Count is dead, we do not care for him. We will go tonight and have a free hunt in his wood, the long wood on the hill that you've seen behind Robeck.' Well, those that heard them say this, they said, 'No, do not go. We are sure you will meet with persons walking who should not be walking. They should be resting, not walking.' These men laughed. There were no forest men to keep the wood because no one wished to hunt there. The family were not here at the house. These men could do as they wished. Very well. They go into the wood that night. My grandfather was sitting here in this room. It was the summer and a light night. With the window open, he could see out to the wood and hear. So he sat there, and 2 or 3 men with him, and they listened. At first they hear nothing at all. Then they hear someone, you know how far away it is. They hear someone scream, just as if the most inside part of his soul was twisted out of him. All of them in the room caught hold of each other, and they sat so for 3/4 of an hour. Then they hear someone else only about 300 ells off. They hear him laugh out loud. It was not one of those 2 men that laughed, and indeed they have all of them said that it was not any man at all. After that, they hear a great door shut. Then, when it was light with the sun, they all went to the priest. They said to him, "Father, put on your gown and your ruff and come and bury these men, Anders Bjornsson and Hans Thorbjorn." You understand that they were sure that these men were dead. So they went to the wood. My grandfather never forgot this. He said they were all like so many dead men themselves. The priest, too, he was in a white fear. He said when they came to him, "I heard one cry in the night, and I heard one laugh afterwards. If I cannot forget that, I shall not be able to sleep again." So they went to the wood, and they found these men on the edge of the wood. Hans Thorbjorn was standing with his back against a tree, and all the time he was pushing with his hands, pushing something away from him that was not there. So he was not dead. And they led him away and took him to the house at Nyköping, and he died before the winter, but he went on pushing with his hands. Also, Anders Bjornsson was there, but he was dead. And I tell you this about Anders Bjornsson. He was once a beautiful man, but now his face was not there, because the flesh of it was sucked away off the bones. You understand that? My grandfather did not forget that. And they laid him on the bier which they brought, and they put a cloth over his head, and the priest walked before, and they began to sing the psalm for the dead as well as they could. So, as they were singing the end of the first verse, one fell down, who was carrying the head of the bier, and the others looked back, and they saw that the cloth had fallen off, and the eyes of Anders Bjornsson were looking up, because there was nothing to close over them, and this they could not bear. Therefore the priest laid the cloth upon him and sent for a spade, and they buried him in that place.